Welcome to the BEI podcast. I'm Lutricia. You know, there's been a lot of talk about DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Instead, we're going to focus on BEI, bigotry, exclusion, and ignorance. Our country has been plagued with it since it was founded. Qualified citizens are denied leadership, silenced, labeled incompetent, all because of who they are or what they look like. We ask, what does it mean to be qualified, and who decides? How do we determine who gets to participate in the American experiment? Can we live up to the principles of our democracy, liberty, and justice for all? I'll say some of it right now because actually I am really thrilled to have you. I appreciate your doing this with me, Tema. And I do want to just talk about and appreciate you. And, I don't have a profile, I don't have your bio in front of me, but you and I've known each other for a long time. And you have been an activist, or you are an activist. I don't know if you've ever stopped being an activist. You're a teacher, you're a facilitator, you're an author. And what I know the most about you is that you're just a good human being. And when I started thinking about this podcast and who I wanted to talk to about this issue of bigotry, exclusion, and ignorance, your name came up immediately that I wanted to have this conversation with.
That doesn't sound good.
Well, let me say the second part, which is I know you've done a lot of work on this issue and you know something about it.
Right.
And so what I think is useful for the audience that we're speaking to is to give us sort of your best insight based on your work about how power and privilege works in our society, because I believe that power and privilege is the underpinning of bigotry, exclusion, and ignorance. And I know you've done a lot of work. So if I were to ask you to say, how do you understand power and privilege as it plays out in our society that says it believes in freedom and justice and equality for everybody? What's your take on it?
Well, before I start that, I was actually, as we were getting ready for this, I was thinking about how I met you before I even started doing this work. I mean, we were on staff together when we started doing this work because organizations were coming to us asking for help with racism and homophobia and all that stuff. So we were there. I was there. You were there at the very beginning. So I'm just sitting in the history of that and the gratitude for that. Well, I think it has everything to do with capitalism, imperialism, and colonialism. I mean, that the power and privilege doesn't exist in a vacuum. It exists in our case, because we were set up as a nation. We were set up to serve capitalism first and foremost. And the people, if you study the history, the people that the freedom was meant for was not everybody. It was the landowning white men. So it's been quite a journey to expand that idea to people who weren't even considered people at the time when we were set up as a nation. So, but I think what we're grappling with now, the incredible rise in hatred and the fear and the incredible rollback of all kinds of civil rights, is because we're sort of seeing the logical consequences of racialized capitalism and the belief that we as a culture, we should be organized in order that fewer and fewer people have more and more, while many, many people have less and less.
I have had such strong feelings about this election and what happened. But when I think about it now, and I've had a chance to step back and reflect, I come away with, how could this be any other way than it is?
Yeah.
I mean, I hear people express shock and dismay and despair about Trump's election and not clear about how it happened. But if you really think about it, and it does start with the work that you and I began at Grassroots Leadership, is we've always had this kind of country.
Yeah.
It is just more obvious to us now than it ever has been. Yeah. And so when I started hearing about, and it seems that they've sort of targeted diversity, equity, and inclusion as sort of the boogeyman, the bad thing in our society. thought, well, no. I mean, we've lived in bigotry, exclusion, and ignorance since we've had a society, since we've had it. And so the one thing that the claim is that diversity, equity, and inclusion grants benefits and privileges to people who don't deserve them. And I'm thinking, Timma, I mean, I've been looking at this last week and a half. I mean, I think about what a classic example
Yeah.
of mediocrity, and how our bigotries and our sort of commitment to white supremacy has gotten us in a situation where we literally have people running this country who don't know what they're doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Quite simply don't know what they're doing. And I want your take on this question that I've been asking myself and trying to unravel. And I think I know some of the answer, but I want to hear it from you. When you think about qualifications, who deserves what in terms of leadership, jobs, what in this country, what does it mean to be qualified? And who decides what qualifications happen or what they are, what they look like? And I'm just curious about how you think about qualified, how you understand how privilege and power happens in this country. What's your best idea about how the notion of qualified plays out in our country right now?
I laughed almost to keep from crying when I look at what's happening in our country right now. And my joke used to be, even before Trump was elected, that if you want an argument for why there's no such thing as reverse racism, or why DEI is a very needed strategy in our country, all you have to do is look at Congress. And that was even before Trump was elected. I mean, so many unqualified, undeserving white men, mostly in office, not doing a particularly good job. So again, the qualified doesn't exist in a vacuum. It has everything to do with the context. And so if you have a nation that's set up to serve profit over everything else, and to serve profit and to use white supremacy as a means of consolidating power in order to serve profit, then qualified gets defined by people who are best suited to do that. But the bigger question is, what do we want people to be qualified for? And what I want people to be qualified for is, how good are you at making connection? How good are you at being in relationship with the earth? How good are you at befriending yourself? What are your qualifications for being in relationship with other living beings? So, and again, there are whole cultures that have existed before now and even now that would define qualified based on a whole different set of values. So it's sort of, what is the culture organized to do? And, in the United States and most Western cultures, they're organized to serve profit. That's what they're organized to do. And some of them do that with more or less concern for the people who create the profit. So you don't have to be as mean-spirited. Capitalism can work, I think, and does work in some European countries without being as mean-spirited towards the people who are actually doing the labor. Just think that this administration is the sort of the logical consequence of a racialized capitalism that has no human or no I don't even no ability to love, basically.
Yeah. I've been having this conversation actually among people that would call themselves progressive and would agree with us. And the last sort of conversation I had with a really good friend, somebody and I won't name her on air, I'll tell you later, who said to me, white supremacy does not exist. That to her, it is about money. And I do think we have some trouble parsing that out, because I didn't have an argument to say, no, it's not about money, because on some level, I agree. I do think part of it is an economic strategy. But I have trouble with her saying, well, it's not about race. Racism is not the issue here. Because, I mean, you tell me, because we've done this work for a while, one of the hardest coalitions we've had difficulty bringing together are poor working class white people who absolutely refuse to be in community and in relationship with people of color. That does not feel like it's about money. It feels like something else to me. I just want your thinking about that.
Well, first of all, much as I love the way that you think about everything, I will say I contest the idea that it's white working class people who don't want to work with people of color. I think that's true in cases where people are deliberately pitted against each other, which is what we're seeing,
Yes,
right?
yes,
But I think that the trouble we're in around white supremacy and racism is can be laid much more at the feet of sort of the white elite. And I was listening to a really wonderful talk by Edward Said, who is a Palestinian professor at Columbia, I think, which is ironic. He's no longer living, and he was talking about how he thinks that culture becomes the weapon through which institutions then can wield their weapons of racism and genocide. And and I say that to say that I think that from the very beginning, the you can't separate capitalism and racism or sexism or patriarchy and they're just to me
you're linked.
they're
Yeah,
just an interlocking weave of strategies that keep each other going, that they all need each other, and because they're so interlocked, you can't I'm really what I would have said to your friend and our friend is that I'm not interested in having a conversation about which is most important. They're all so linked that I'm not going to deny that capitalism and money is at the center. And I'm also going to say racism is at the center and sexism is at the center because they're all operate together. They don't operate like racism is happening over here.
yes.
So they're all operating together. It's like who's more racist than who? Those kinds of arguments don't interest me. It's like how do you,
Yeah, I hear that. And the reason we were in this conversation was my attempt to invite her to understand white supremacy and be willing to do something about it in her
yeah.
own community, to notice it. And when she said, well, it doesn't exist, it's about privilege, that's what that's where we kind of got stuck. But I'm interested in your idea about working class people as a group not wanting to work and form coalitions with people of color. And I'm curious about what you've seen or understood in your work that leads you to that. Because I can just remember some places where I've been and wanting to establish meetings and connections with people and working, literally being in working class white communities who say, there's something about their the color of their skin that makes a difference to them.
Mhm.
And they have said to me, I don't want to be associated with this because I lose leverage in other places. So I'm just curious about what you've heard and what you've understood and seen
Well,
in your work.
I mean, I think about, and this is where I'm not going to be able to cite. I would need to go back and do some of the reading that I've done in the past because I'm really not good at holding on to specific facts in this way. But what I will reference is sort of all the long history of union fights, successful union fights
Yes. Yes.
that happened where
Yes.
white people, black people, uh,
Yes.
Latinx people, Latina people, where people of all different races and ethnicities figured out a way to come together. And that for me, in my experience, the racism that has been the hardest to combat is the racism that is held by highly educated white people who it's sort of the way I talk, because I've taught it. So my experience is mostly teaching in classrooms. And I've taught in classrooms where undergraduate, master's level and doctoral level classrooms. In most cases, my students have been predominantly white. And I've taught in classrooms where students were the first in their families to come to college. And I've taught
Mm-hmm.
in classrooms where it's the sort of the children of the white elite. And it's the children of the white elite who are the white elite themselves who are the hardest, in my experience, to teach because I have to move through more levels of denial about how racism works and about their connection to it or their own racist conditioning than I do when I'm working with students who haven't been told
Indoctrinated. Yeah.
into their own goodness in the same kind of way. And my experience in a classroom is that so I'm thinking about when I was teaching at UNCG, which was historically white nursing and teaching college and now serves everyone. And the students, they tend to attract. So I was teaching an education course on race, class, and gender. And I would say half of my class were the first in their families to come to college. And I just have this really strong memory of one of the students with a working class background, which I knew because of how I invite people to tell their stories in class, who was just really resistant to the ideas that I was teaching him when we were starting with class. And he was like, no, it doesn't work like this. America is fair. It's all fair. What you're teaching me is wrong. And then we did an activity called the 10 Chairs activity, which United for a Fair
Yeah.
Economy put together, where you have 10 people on a chair, and each chair represents a tenth of the economy or a tenth of the money available to people. And then we have people sit fairly, where everybody's on a chair. And then we had people sit on the chairs the way it actually is. And you end up having 9 people on one chair, when they could barely sit, they can't really do it. And then one person spread over all the rest of the chairs with his arm up on the top 3 chairs, which is the 1%. And that activity blew this young student's mind. And he was like, what? No, what? No.
Yeah.
In that moment, for the rest of the semester, he became my most curious and strongest advocate in the classroom because it was like, oh, I've been lied to. I haven't been told how this really works. And he didn't have to work through all these layers of, well, I'm so educated, or I'm so knowledgeable, or I'm so, this can't possibly be true. I think it serves the white supremacy myth and it serves to separate white people from each other.
Right.
By creating this idea that, it's the uneducated poor people who are the problem. And meanwhile, the people who are causing the problems are in Congress, highly educated, law degrees, all kinds of degrees, passing really discriminatory, bigoted, racist laws, and blaming it on poor working people, and also whipping up their fear.
Right.
Which is what Trump is doing. I mean, Trump is doing a masterful job at the divide and conquer strategy. So, yeah.
You know that I taught at Guilford, and I was having this conversation with the dean because there was this big sort of uproar that happened at Guilford around race, and we were talking about it. And she said, and it reminded me, I was reminded of this because of your conversation with the student. And she said, I taught my kids not to see race.
Mhm.
Now, she thought she was doing it as a good thing
Yeah.
because she said, I taught them not to see race. When things came on the TV, we turned it off. We didn't want to have this discussion. And she says, but to my dismay, at this point where there really needs to be some understanding and clarity and a voice about race and eliminating it and working more from an anti-racist paradigm, she says, my children could be less interested.
Yeah.
They just don't recognize that as an issue. They don't feel it, and it feels like it's psychological and emotional, that we train these students, these privileged kids, to just simply not care about it.
Yeah.
To see the world as fair and honest and just, and therefore, I can choose to not care about the fact that there are Black people getting shot in the back or being locked up, or this is happening to women, because I live in this sort of bubble that says life is good. And it's a hard bubble to come out of. And I'm just wondering if that's what you notice as well. I was just struck by her notion that in an effort to keep her kids, sort of make them non-racist, she actually created almost the opposite.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think there's any such thing as a non-racist, really, and I also talk about it now as our racist conditioning, that white people are
Our racist conditioning.
carry racist conditioning.
Okay.
And
Okay.
just about the language that I use, because I find it helpful to say to people, myself included, when I engage in racist thinking or do something, have a racist action, I think about it in terms of it's my racist conditioning coming out, and it helps me to notice it, and then to interrupt it, and then to do something about it, versus just berating myself for being racist. And that's like, I'm not interested in debating whether somebody's racist or not racist. I'm interested in how are they showing up, and what's their relationship to the racism that they are inevitably navigating in some way or another, either as a white person through our racist conditioning and our position of dominance, or if you're a person of color, how are we doing that? That's what's interesting to me.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
and I'm much more juicy conversation than whether somebody is or isn't racist, which I think is a ridiculous conversation to have.
Yeah.
So I think that, and I think, the truth is that we can find denial everywhere, and we can find people who are taking it on and noticing it and naming it and doing something about it, and everywhere. And, it's just, it doesn't, I actually don't think it is defined by by class, or, I mean, I'm sure there are statistics that would prove me wrong here, but my experience is it's not the challenge that I hear you talking about is people who try to keep racism and white supremacy as an individual interpersonal problem.
Yes.
And it's
Yeah.
so much more than that. And so to teach your child not to see race means that they're denying institutional racism, they're denying cultural racism, they're denying all the ways that white supremacy and racism are informing the way that we think and behave in the world. And that doesn't serve anybody. It just doesn't serve.
Yeah.
It doesn't
Yeah.
serve white people. It doesn't serve people. It doesn't serve anybody. To deny that we're to pretend that the culture isn't teaching us things, and isn't teaching us things that actually don't serve us. So, yeah.
I do think there's a tension between recognizing yourself and ourselves as individuals
Yeah.
who should be attending to our own self-interest. We don't deny that.
Yes.
And connecting ourselves to the world in which we live and
Yes.
the society and the community
Yes.
that we live in, and the society and community that nurtures us and supports us and provides for us. And, in the conversations I've had with, well, I mean, just conversations I've had with people, that is the tension.
Yeah.
Do I recognize and take care of my side of the road, as I've heard some people say? Or do I recognize that I'm part of a family, a community, a society that I'm accountable to, and who is accountable to me? And I'm wondering, in your work, how do you help people make that shift? Or have you had some success in helping people situate themselves in a larger context than the one than their family or who they are as human beings?
Yeah. Yes. I think that's all due to the curriculum that we developed at Grassroots Leadership, and then that Kenneth and I took and developed even more. And so, when I was in my doctoral program, I ended up writing what we learned down. And so, there's this book. It's old now. It's 2010, but I think it's still relevant in terms of there is a way, if I'm teaching there, we came up with a process that moved people through. So then when we started, there are people who do it. I don't even know where to start here. So what that process does is it helps people it gives people a framework for understanding how racism operates, and that it's much more than our individual beliefs. And it teaches that we're in a culture that tells us all that racism is our individual beliefs. But it's not just that. So we teach history, we look at institutional racism and how institutions exclude and underserve and exploit and violate people of color while serving. So we go through the whole thing with institutions, we go through the whole thing about culture, and then we say, now we're going to situate you in that. So you're in this culture and you're in these institutions. How is that impacting you? And how do you want to show up given that you're in this culture and in these institutions? And we teach about organizing, and we teach about all the ways that people resist and all the ways that people show up, and how it serves us to understand how all this stuff is working, that the only way we can get free of it is to be able to see it and name it. And if we deny that it's happening or pretend it's not happening, then we're caught up in it, and we can't possibly be free. And I think the challenge there is that white supremacy is so clever and so devious that one of the ways it operates is to tell white people that we have to protest if anybody calls us racist, although that's different now.
Yes.
Changing
Yeah.
now. Under Trump, people are proud of being racist, but it used to be, we can't possibly admit that we're affected by this. The right position to take is like, I met an individual, I'm not affected by racism, none of this stuff affects me. And so it's sort of it goes back to why I find it easier to teach people who haven't been inculcated with this idea that it's just about our individual opinions and our individual behaviors. It's much easier to teach those folks that there's this bigger system, because they have experienced how the bigger system works on them.
Well, I've always been nervous about this notion of how we cancel people because we claim that they are because they say something
Yeah.
that sounds a bit racist. And it's really pretty brutal what we do, I think. And I think by pursuing that in that way, we actually shut people out of a possibility of connecting, being related, recognizing that they're part of a community, and they're part of a community that is willing to embrace them and all that they are. And that we're willing to struggle through, our questions, our concerns, our ignorance about what's happened to us, because it's happened to all of us.
Yeah.
And that's the conversation. And I think this has happened to all of us.
Yeah.
And so I get a little nervous about separating people out and saying, look, you said this thing and it's racist, and therefore we're kicking you to the curb and we don't want to talk to you anymore. I think that's a recipe for maintaining what we already have. And actually, I think the other side loves it when we do that.
Totally. So Loretta Ross apparently is coming out with a book about this very thing. So I look forward to that. And there's two things I would say about that. One is that I very much used to be like that. And in this book that I wrote, I describe how I went through 3 phases in my development as a educator, facilitator. And in the first phase, I never started doing white caucusing or white affinity groups until I started working with Kenneth, who was my colleague for many years after grassroots leadership. Mm-hmm. And he was my elder, and he was more experienced African-American man, been doing it longer. And he instructed me that I was going to lead these white affinity groups. And I did what he told me. So I said, okay, I'll do it. But I didn't know what I was doing, and I didn't want to do it. And I felt like, why would I want to be in a room with other white people? How can I prove I'm one of the good white people if you put me away with the other white people? I want to be in rooms with people of color. But he told me to do it. And I usually did what he said. So I did it. But I didn't know I was there, and I'm pretty sure I was pretty terrible at it. And then halfway through, a few years later, I started catching on. I can see why white people need to be in a room together, because we have so many issues that we need to talk about amongst ourselves about how our racist conditioning is showing up, although I didn't have that language. But I was very self-righteous. And that was my calling out period. It was like, I'm a good white person. Look at me. I lead racial equity trainings. I'm smart about this stuff. I've got my shit together, and all you other white people, you have to prove yourself to me. And if you can't prove yourself to me, I don't, and which is a terrible position to take. And then finally I realized I'm on a journey, everybody's on a journey, and it doesn't serve anybody for me to separate myself from other white people like this. And I haven't got my shit together, actually. I may be more experienced, but it doesn't mean I'm free of my racist conditioning. Once I reached that point and sort of understood that really, I don't know how to explain that. It shifted everything for me. It was like I no longer wanted to separate myself from other white people. I wanted to be in community so that we could see what was possible. But what I discovered from that place is that a lot of times we get that way. We get strident or righteous because we're afraid, and because we so desire a world that makes sense. And we somehow think if we just, so it comes from this place of longing and yearning for a better world. It's just,
and for connection, I think.
Yeah, it's just misplaced, and it doesn't actually work. So I have more compassion for it, and I try and help people not to stay there very long, myself included. Like when I start to feel self-righteous, I try and notice it and go, let's just chill out a little bit here. So, yeah.
Yeah, my experience, I say this, I'm interested in your take on it. And I say this because a white person said this to me, is that white people are essentially, as a group, are lonely. Yes. Like they're the only group of people who actually sit in opposition to other groups and are having to struggle with other groups. And so I also think part of their yearning is for connectedness, for them to be seen as simply human beings doing the best they can, which is what's helped me.
Yes.
What has helped me, and I have been, me, so I have been pretty pissed.
Yeah.
And what has helped me is to come to a place of recognizing that my own fallacies and my own fallibility and my own mistakes and my own stupidity, and to recognize that is part of the human condition, and that there are people with whom I disagree who are struggling just as hard as I am to sort of show up as decent human beings doing the best they can. And they're showing up with a certain level of sadness and grief and pain and confusion and anger as I am. And that, recognizing that in folks as opposed to recognizing the latest mistake or the latest stupid thing you said,
Yeah.
is for me the key to building what I heard you say a few moments ago, which is building connections and relatedness, which is the only way I think we're going to get out of this.
Yeah. I agree with that. Yeah. I think white people are desperate for belonging. The closer to whiteness we are, the more desperate we are, because whiteness doesn't really offer anything. And so another huge turning point for me was when I went to a talk by Ruby Sales, who's an African-American public theologian. She said from the stage, I don't think whiteness is a privilege. I think it's a death sentence. And when she said that, everything again changed for me. And I thought, she's absolutely right. Whiteness might offer some people in the white group, a lot of wealth and a lot of material privilege. I'll use that word, an advantage. But psychically and spiritually and physically, except, well, maybe in terms of healthcare, it offers advantages, but it doesn't offer spiritually and psychically, it offers no advantages at all. In fact, it's a complete and utter disadvantage, or it's worse, it's a hellhole as far as I can see. And it's devoid. I mean, because whiteness is constructed, and it was constructed for the purpose of domination at the expense of whole other communities of people, it has nothing, there's no love in it. There's no love in it. And so the more people, I mean, and just, when I'm not feeling angry and despairing at their power, I actually feel some level of something, I don't know, compassion, sorrow for some of the people who are in MAGA, who are, I think, probably scared. And there's an addictive quality to that kind of belonging, where that sort of hate bully belonging, which is that you get a high from being with other people and all this energy that wants to attack other people and get other people, and then you do that and it subsides, and you need another fix, and you need another fix, and you need another. That what we're seeing with Donald Trump. It's just one cruel thing after another cruel thing, because he just needs another fix of cruelty, sort of.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's
it's that them versus us
yeah
sort of mentality that I see, on the other side. And if you start organizing around the us being, we need to be afraid of these people, we're losing something is being taken away from us,
right.
We're being mistreated, we're being ill-used. And you're right, Trump was a genius.
Yeah.
And sort of picking that up and saying and running with it in ways that other people hadn't, but just to say it out loud to folks that needed to hear that. And he created this matter group, which I think runs on fear and runs on a serious lack of empathy, but it's disconnected from their sense of their humanity in a larger context other than the us that they've created. We used to could live with that until they became president of the United States and started creating what we have right now, which I think is distressing for a lot of people.
I think we're collapsing. What we're doing, it's collapse.
Yeah.
I also want to just make sure that we understand that it's a response to Obama. I mean, that with every
yes, absolutely,
and I have my criticism of him too. So this is all. Obama didn't take us out of the capitalist framework either, but it's all, we make progress in some ways. Like, and by that I mean we acknowledge LGBTQ plus people, we acknowledge transgender people, we pass some laws that protect people, we pass some laws for working people. We make some progress to acknowledge the humanity to broaden our understanding of who's human and how they need to be protected. And then there's a backlash, and that backlash is manufactured by, so let's be clear. I mean, it needs manufactured by the power elite. It's not in their interest. It's like big business doesn't want regulations that mean they can't rape the earth. Big business doesn't want regulations. I mean, in some states now, which state was it? They just passed a law essentially making child labor legal again.
Florida.
Yeah.
So it was Florida.
So there's just, it's like, this is not the work of poor, white, ignorant people. This is the work of Congress, of the power elite, of lawyers and doctors and so-called well-educated people who are serving money. So, no.
I did, I'm a civil rights veteran. I did the sit-ins, the pickets, the whole thing.
Yeah.
And I can remember, like, I was in Spartanburg, South Carolina, and we were successful in our campaign. We integrated all of these public facilities. We did a really good job.
Hmm.
But I remember after we did this, I remember asking myself the question, how do we bring the people who oppose us into community with us?
Yeah.
And I don't think I
Yes.
don't, you know what? I don't even know that if it was possible,
Yeah.
but in many ways, we didn't even think about that as a strategy
Right.
in the civil rights in the movement, at least
Yeah.
as I heard it and understood it.
Yeah.
We didn't think about that as a strategy. Now, maybe it was impossible. Maybe these people were so angry and so confused and upset that they would not even think about
Hmm.
being in relatedness or relationship with us.
Yeah.
But I wonder what would have happened if we had sort of tried to do that.
Yeah. I think that's still something we can work on now. I think that I remember this is a sample of one, so I don't know how informative it is, but sometimes people write to me through the website. I have a couple of websites, and it doesn't happen so much anymore. But for a while, maybe 5 or 6 times a year, I'd get a hate letter from somebody. And one time I got a letter that said, "You hate white people." And I just decided I'd write back. And I said, "Thanks for writing to me. I actually don't hate white people at all. And I certainly don't hate you. I don't even know you, and you don't know me. And I think if you did know me, you'd probably like me." And, I just sort of wrote, and the person wrote back immediately and said, "I'm so sorry. I just was angry. I just wanted to," and we had a pretty decent conversation. So I'm wondering how thin this is for some people around just not knowing what to do with how erased they feel, how powerless they feel, how, yeah, and more we can.
Yeah, because I also asked myself this other question. If I were on the other side of it and I had recognized myself and my whole identity was rooted in this way of being,
Yeah.
these were the folks, this is how we relate to them, this is what we do, here's the school I go to, here is my reality. What would it feel like to me if somebody came and said, look, this is wrong, you're wrong,
Yeah.
we're going to change this, your life will now be different?
Yeah.
What would that stir up in me? And I would think, I would be scared to death.
Yeah.
And I would not know what to hold on to. I would no longer know what to believe in. I would feel betrayed because
Yeah.
somebody's telling me that what I thought was true for all of my life is no longer true. And that would cause a certain amount of psychological and emotional suffering
Yeah.
that I wouldn't know what to deal with. And depending on whether or not I had a healthy coping strategy, it could result in my showing up in front of a school building with a little 6-year-old girl yelling and screaming and spitting at her. That could be the result. And what could bring me out of that, which has been my continuing question? What could help me at that point in my life?
I wish I had an answer to that. I do know. I'm going to say one thing, and then I'm going to say two things. The first is that the first time I really understood that was when I was teaching at UNCG. Another student, young white woman, after I was teaching something about racism, I think the class left, and she was there, and she was crying. And I went up to her and I said, "What's going on? What's wrong?" And she said, I believe what you're teaching, Dr. Okun, I really do, but now I can't go home."
Mm-hmm.
And that was the first time I really understood what I was asking of some of the people that I was teaching, which is that you can't, if you're gonna start to understand what's really happening, if you've been lied to most of your life, and then somebody, and another reason that I think Trump and his people are going after colleges so much is because almost everybody I know who talks about where that shift began for them, if they went to college, it was in college.
Mm-hmm.
And fed a whole bunch of, they've been fed a certain story, and then they go to college, and in college they're exposed to lots of different ways of thinking, and it shakes them up, and they have to think about things differently. And that we're asking people to sometimes give up their families or to give up their most beloved relationships when we invite them into this information. And
And
that,
even more importantly than that, we're asking them to give up something they'd already known, and we don't really have a place for them to come to.
that's right.
See, we don't have, it would be one, I mean, Dr. King talked about
Yeah.
the beloved community. But on our end, Tema, we have to ask ourselves, how good have we been
Yes.
at creating this thing called beloved community?
Yes.
Because that's our work to do. But we really, if if I'm asking you to be or to understand and accept something that's different from your reality, then I must offer something
Yes.
that you can hold on to.
Yes.
And you can get, and what I think we did, unfortunately, and sort of inadvertently, is when we started canceling people and nailing them for these comments that they would make, those folks who we may have been able to attract to us
Mm-hmm.
were in a no person's land.
Right.
They couldn't go back home, and we were not welcoming them.
Yeah.
And so I think we have a group of folks that's still there.
Yeah.
And the question that, I think we're both answering is, how do we reach out? One. And then two, how do we begin to put in place the world we believe in? But I think the world we believe in would say, we recognize that we're human beings, and we're having this experience that's hurting all of us, as you say. And our work is to figure out how to be together and work our way through it.
I think it does require that we recognize that people are in different phases of their own evolution. And in some
Mm-hmm.
so I think and I used to teach about this ladder of development, and they're sort of from white people going from being born to and being taught that they're white and what that means, to beloved community, and people of color being born and realizing what that means and going through all their stages to beloved community. On the white person side, it would be, denial and defensiveness and denial, and stage, and the people of color chart would be rage and exclusion. And we're in a meeting together, so, where people,
Right.
so that there's this way in which we don't have to do anything, but I think about people who are gender fluid, and again, this attack on pronouns that Trump is so obsessed with. And in the communities I'm in, where people want to respect people's pronouns, and people are in different levels of their own attachment to their pronouns, and being able to hold the both and of every single person has the right to define who they want to be and how they want to be named, while at the same time, some people do or don't understand that in the same kind of way. And so,
Right.
it's not one or the other. It's the both and of that. And some of us can do that. Some of us are prepared to be in the both and. Some of us aren't. Like if I'm
Yeah.
just coming into my identity as an activist, or or pro-Palestine or something, I'm not actually going to have a lot of patience for you and your defensiveness around how I show up. So it's just like, how do we? To me, it feels like a dance. Like, if those of us who
Yeah.
are more prepared to sit with ambiguity can do that, and those of us who need to be more, but there needs to be some, I don't know, we need to coordinate in some better way.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned Palestine, and I want to have this conversation with you about, because I know how much this issue resonates and how much you care about it. When you think about it, and I've been thinking about Netanyahu, and who, in my mind, shows all of the qualities of white supremacy. Although I don't know that we think about Israel and Palestine in the context of white supremacy, but I do, and I'm wondering if you do too. But
Totally. I mean, what we're seeing is, it's why it's so, I think Netanyahu and Trump are made out of the same cloth. I think I would even use the word evil for both of them. I think that, it's a much longer story, but I think Israel is really a horrifying lesson in a settler colonial project that has required from the beginning. And if people study the history, the early Zionists were absolutely clear. They were absolutely clear that the Zionist project required getting rid of the Palestinian people. They were not ambiguous about that. And so it's been, even though the Palestinian people did nothing except be on the land that the Allied powers granted to Israel, because none of the Allied powers wanted to accept Jewish refugees. So the anti-Semitism at the center of the story has to do with that there was a Zionist thread within the larger Jewish community that wanted its own homeland. They were actually considering land in Africa for a while. My joke is they should have considered New Jersey, but that the Allied powers got together and said, oh, we're going to give you this land. We're going to make it possible for you to move to this land. And we're not going to deal with the fact that Palestinians already live there, and that'll be your problem. And the motivation was, we don't want you coming here. So, that's the anti-Semitism in the story. It's not Palestinian anti-Semitism. Jews and Palestinians, although there were many more Palestinians, were living in relative harmony on that land before the state of Israel existed. So the Zionist project, like any nationalist project, is a project that says these people are human and these people are not. And that's the justification for, how are you going to get rid of people who are living on the land? It's no different from the genocide here, genocide of indigenous people, enslavement of African people here. It's like we're going to create a cultural story, as Edward Said said, a cultural story that says these aren't real people. These are dangerous people. These are terrorists. These are savage people. These are criminal people. These are bad people. And using that narrative, we will make people afraid of these people, and that'll serve as the justification for getting rid of them. And that's
which is sort of the core element of white supremacy. That is absolutely necessary for that to happen.
Yes. Yeah. And it's happening in real time in front of our very eyes and in the most horrific ways possible by a people who less than 2 generations ago were experiencing it themselves. That's the hard part. That's the hard part.
And I know your background as a Jewish person, and I know that must be painful for you to recognize that.
It's betrayal is what it feels like to me.
Wow.
I was in a conversation. So, and the way this is linked is I was in a conversation with, I'm in a Palestinian study group right now, a group that's studying Palestinian writers and historians. And one of the other Jewish women, when we're sort of processing our feelings, said, I feel like I've been lied to my whole life. That's, again, it's the same thing that we've been talking about with white people. It's like you get the Ashkenazi, the dominant Jewish community in the U.S. and globally has been fed this narrative about Israel and Israel as the beacon of safety for all Jews, and has been fed a certain kind of history for so long, and has been mandating silence about the Palestinian experience for so long, that you have mainstream Jewish people in this country who refuse to look at what's happening in Gaza, refuse to admit that anything wrong is happening, or even worse, say it's necessary. There's a rabbi in this.
Even though Palestinians are dying and wholesale, they just don't.
They've been taught from the beginning that Palestinians are dangerous and are terrorists. So there's a rabbi in this community. When somebody asked him, he said, "It's true. It's sad that Palestinian children are dying, but it is necessary."
Ooh.
So that's
heartbreaking.
The twisted thinking that many, if not most, Jews in this country have, and that's the part that's heartbreaking.
That's heartbreaking. That is tough.
Beloved community for me. So there is beloved community in this situation. So I'm part of Jewish Voice for Peace. I'm part of a local chapter here. I find beloved community whenever I find anti-Zionist Jews. And so I think similarly, I find beloved community whenever I find white people who are not interested in being invested in whiteness in that.
Can anyone join your group? Can anyone join?
And there's a new group has just formed called Christians for a Free Palestine, because we JVP wants to remain mostly Jewish, although non-Jews are welcome. But we are partners with a lot of Palestinian groups, with a lot of Christian groups. So yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, Tim, you know how much I respect you and how much regard I have for you, and you know that I love you.
Well,
and I
got you.
You have been on this journey since we've known each other, which is what, 30 years? How long?
Long time ago.
I don't want to talk about how long it's been. It's been a long time.
It's 89.
Yeah. And so I want to thank you for having this conversation with me today, and I'm hoping you're willing to come back. And
thanks for asking.
I want to partner with you in whatever you're doing. I have not known what work was happening around the issue of the Palestinians and Israel and what's happening there, but count me in. Let me know what I can do. Call on me. I will bring people with me.
Right, great. Yeah.
Okay. And thank you so much for joining me on this podcast.
Thank you for having me. You know how
I
feel the same about you. It's good to be in conversation again.
Thank you. Thank you for joining our podcast. Please visit our website, everybodyasourOwn.org, and join our monthly Hear, HEAR, and Now conversations. If you appreciate this content, please like and subscribe to us. It is deeply appreciated. See you next time.